Americans want our troops brought home. And I'd just like to show this chart because it shows what happened to the American people's opinion of the war just in the last couple of years. It's almost completely flipped from before the major escalation started to now. You've seen it almost complete reversal. Most people, most Americans want those troops brought home. And so when you hear the idea, you know, the other side likes to push this idea that the American people won't tolerate withdrawal, that, you know, a political party will be pegged as weak on defense, et cetera, et cetera. That is not true. The American people are ready to end this war. Now, and they're ready, by the way, to end it pretty quick. This is the question, remove troops ASAP. Like, we could get some planes over there immediately and get the troops out. That was the question asked. And most people, almost 60%, want the troops to come home. Now, it's also translating into a shift in insider public opinion, which is good, but we're not quite there yet. This is a story from the National Journal, obviously, which is a publication that caters specifically to Capitol Hill. And what they're reporting is an increasing number of members of Congress and kind of high-level think tank folks who are fed up with the kind of strategy that's been fed to us by the generals at this point. So what we're seeing, I mean, the movement is having an effect. It's hard to get that sense when you're out in the street and you're protesting and you still see troops over there, but I just want to encourage folks that are here who are part of the movement to end the war that just like the Occupy Wall Street stuff, this is having an effect. It's just a frustratingly slow effect, and we're getting there. But this war is just kind of a microcosm of a much larger problem we have in this country with military spending. And the conference theme is Take Back the American Dream. And I kind of want to talk for a little bit about what the costs are to the American dream of not just the Afghanistan war, but the much larger set of military spending that we're doing in this country, because it's very relevant right now. The great speaker right before us in the plenary, Rob Reich, told the great sort of summary of what the Deficit Committee's up to. And at Brave New Foundation, we have a project called War Costs right now that's focusing on specifically the Deficit Committee's work and making very stark the choices that the Deficit Committee faces. Because the way it's set up, it's basically a zero-sum game, right? The Deficit Committee has been charged by law now to recommend cuts of a certain number. I think it's $1.5 trillion or somewhere close to that. If they don't recommend those, or if the cuts that they recommend don't get passed, there are automatic cuts that take place. So what that means is if one big ticket program retains its funding and survives, somewhere else just got slashed. So if they don't cut the defense budget, the programs that are very important to us in taking back the American dream, Social Security, Medicare, are going to get, I think it's pretty tame to say, a pretty serious haircut in those recommendations. So we're trying to make sure that the members of Congress understand what they're talking about when they're saying things like Senator Kyle says, like, I'm off the committee if we're going to talk about defense cuts. You know, so I mean that, which is pretty outrageous, right? I mean, you know, maybe not a big loss.
Infantile.
It is very infantile. It's very infantile. What was your question?
In terms of defense cuts, maybe we could break it down. Where are we at war right now?
Oh my, that's a good. What she asked is for folks that couldn't hear, where are we at war right now? That is a big question. I mean, there are two wars ongoing that are in most people's mind, which is in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the United States is at war all across the planet. There are at least 6 wars going on. Plus, I can try, unfortunately. Like, we have Iraq, Afghanistan. We are taking military action in Yemen. We have taken military action in Somalia. We are taking military action in Libya. And this isn't even counting aid, military aid to other countries, right? So there are several places on the Pakistan. Don't forget Pakistan. That's a major oversight on my part. I'm glad. You had a question, too, and then I'll continue.
A big movement of troops into North Africa.
Well, a lot of that has to do with special operations. She said that, for the folks that couldn't hear, there's a movement of troops into North Africa. There has been movement of things like special operations forces into North Africa, and especially, you know, with Libya. There's that activity. But yes, a lot of that has to do with the government's attempts to fight Al-Qaeda. If you don't mind, could I ask to hold questions to the end, and then we'll just keep going, because I could go on forever about these, and you don't want that. So I just want to talk about the rhetoric that's being used to try to stop the cuts to the Pentagon budget and kind of give you a sense. Joe's going to get more into the nuts and bolts numbers of this, but I just want to make some comparisons and show you how kind of overheated this rhetoric's getting. So this poor beleaguered ball is the poor defense budget, right? That if you listen to the things coming out of Congress, this poor guy's getting kicked around all over the place, right? The words doomsday have been used to describe the automatic cuts, which are essentially, from their point of view, the worst case scenario for the Pentagon, because the way the deficit committee law works is these automatic triggers would hit security spending. Now that's more than just the Pentagon budget, right? But just for purposes of argument, just to kind of grant the bad assumptions on the other side, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about if all those cuts fell just on the base Pentagon budget, not even talking about the wars, just the base Pentagon budget, what the comparisons actually are. Now, if I were going to do something that you would call doomsday to this poor little guy, maybe I would give a cut like this, right? That's a pretty big cut. That's that is the amount we will spend on the Pentagon-based budget if there are no cuts made to it at all in 2013. Now, if I kicked it hard enough to make it do that, that's a pretty big cut. It's pretty significant if you're in the Pentagon trying to figure out where the money's going to come from. But just to give you a sense of the kind of money we're talking about, that little ball represents China's military budget. Just to show you the comparison between those two, right? Now, that's not actually what's on the table for doomsday. Now, going back to our little friend here, just try to think in your head what doomsday would be, and then consider what the budget will be if the worst case scenario, the catastrophe, the breaking faith with the troops doomsday happens, and know that this is what we're talking about. I'm going to do it again, in case you didn't notice any difference, because you probably won't when it happens. That's doomsday that we're talking about. And I want to congratulate all of you, by the way. Before I do that, just to compare again, that's doomsday versus China, which is our next peer competitor when it comes to spending in the world on military spending. They're telling us that they cannot absolutely defend this country without spending that much more, or if that's the comparison, that they can't possibly keep us safe, which that kind of speaks a little bit of incompetence to me, if we're being honest, but whatever. But I want to congratulate all of you, because it turns out you've all survived doomsday before. We've actually, in the recent history, you've survived a world where, oh my God, we only spent that much. It was 2007. Like, you didn't know it, but you were in the middle of the apocalypse in 2007. That, if the worst case scenario happens, according to the other side, we'll be forced to spend only the amazing amounts of money that we spent in 2007, which, by the way, was the record year up to that point. So, congratulations, you made it through. Now, we've been here before, and the same people who are leading the charge against those cuts were perfectly fine with that level of money when it was them writing the check. The major member of Congress, I would say right now, that's pushing the hardest and is the most blatant advocate on behalf of defense contractor companies to stop these cuts is Buck McKeon, who is the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. And he says that it would open the door to aggression and deter our ability to respond to an attack, and that would be severely crippling. Oh my gosh. But he voted for that same amount of money twice in 2007 and was happy to do it when they were the ones, who felt like they were being tough on defense at the time. So just kind of when you hear these kind of crazy end-of-the-world scenario words, you just remember they were fine with them just not too long ago. Now, Joe's going to talk more about this chart when she gets up to speak. This is the United States in comparison to the rest of the world's military spending when you look at it in total. The other big chunk over there isn't China. The other big chunk is all the other countries that aren't in the top 10 put together. China is the red slice right under us, and that's for 2010. Now, to give you an idea of where we would be situated in the rest of the world, I just did a fun thought exercise and went and grabbed the group that did this report's numbers for 2007 and just plugged the 2007 levels in and left everybody else's the same, and this is what the pie chart would look like. The purple that's everybody that's not in the top 10 kind of aggregated together. Others. The poor folks that don't make the top of the list, I guess. But you can see there's not much change here if we're talking the worst case scenario. So just keep that in mind also when we talk about these doomsday cuts. Now, we talked about where people are when it's time to cut the Afghanistan war spending, right? But it turns out that the American people are also okay with cutting the military budget generally. When you ask, can we significantly reduce military spending without putting the American people at risk, almost half say yes, and a little more than a third say no. So the plurality by far understands that we're spending enormous amounts of money on an amount that doesn't have anything to do with national security and more to do with political posturing and, you know, keeping defense contractors who make political contributions happy. Now, we at War Costs have been trying to really focus people's attention on the deficit committee because that has been one of the, we don't like the general situation, right? Like the fact that these cuts are going to happen is terrible. If there's going to be any sort of silver lining out of it, it would be the first real opportunity to get at the defense budget that's happened in a long time. Can we hold questions to the end?
I was just wondering, is that Pew as well?
That's Rasmussen.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
Rasmussen. Yeah, which isn't necessarily a progressive poll, right? So I mean, this is their finding, right? So that's kind of why I picked it. Actually, it's a really defensible poll from that perspective. So what we're trying to do, I'm going to show you a video that we've put together. I'm going to pause it for a second to kind of set it up. I'll back up so it doesn't start. Sorry, this will crash. But also that your constituents specifically are going to be out of jobs if we cut those defense contracts. Like, you know, Patty Murray, the people who work at Boeing are going to be out of a job, and you're going to lose your job if you let those cuts happen. But what people don't understand when they say that is that many, many, many more people and much, much more money comes into those same congressional districts from Social Security and Medicare. In fact,
more than 16 million people represented by members of the Deficit Committee rely on Social Security and Medicare. But military contractors are spending very large sums of money to convince the committee to protect their profits. The law requires the Deficit Committee to recommend cuts. Programs that escape cuts will do so at the expense of other programs. If the committee fails to cut war spending, popular programs like Social Security and Medicare will be on the chopping block.
Defense may be something that most members on the Democratic side will not mind going after, but I do mind.
The issues of defense spending really are not partisan. Thoughtless, wasteful spending happens pretty much as often among Democrats as it does with Republicans.
No one, and I mean no one, is going to beat you out for this contract.
I am actually really concerned about the history of both Murray and Clyburn when it comes to Savannah River or Boeing and their loyalties to the programs involved with those facilities in their districts.
Boeing is a game changer for South Carolina.
She put Boeing back in the game.
I'm off of the committee if we're going to talk about further defense spending.
I think anyone who's on the super committee who isn't willing to look at defense spending should quit the committee. For Senator Kyle to say that he would quit if defense is on the table is simply absurd. Our biggest battle when we're trying to stop a wasteful weapons program are the members of Congress who are defending it simply because of the really cynical political engineering that the contractors have planned so that there are a few jobs in just about every district scattered across the country. So you're always going to have that support from all of those members of Congress.
The deficit committee process. But their rhetoric is purely propaganda because it's without any context. There are people who rely on the military for jobs, that's true, who rely on military contracts. But if you spent that same amount of money on any other kind of federal spending, or you just had it in your pocket to spend on consumption, you would be able to generate more jobs that actually have bigger economic multipliers than defense spending. You can see the difference between military spending and education spending when it comes to job creation is huge. And that's not just direct jobs included in that. That's the people that are employed, the jobs that are the businesses that rely on them to do business, the things that spring up around those other businesses to do business with them, like restaurants or things like that. It is a much better investment to do any other kind of spending. So when you realize that the deficit committee is going to choose between these kind of three big buckets to do most of their cuts, if they're going to cut anywhere, they're going to have, if they're interested in creating jobs, the lion's share of those cuts have to fall in the defense budget, because otherwise you're going to be cutting the kinds of spending that create much, much more jobs. So I'm going to let Joe speak about the hard numbers about the military budget and what the trade-offs are. But I want to encourage you all to stay connected with the War Cost campaign at warcost.com. You can also find us on Facebook, and I'll send my email around also after we're done here. But please contact me if you have any questions. And then after we get done with the series of presentations, we'll take questions. So I'm going to let Joe come up. Thanks.